The knock came at hour 6:30, sharp, measured, too formal for morning coffee, too early for ceremony. Commander Margaret, Maggie. Dawson barely looked up from her reports inside the sonar analysis room aboard the USS Liberty, one of the Navy's most decorated nuclear-powered carriers. After 8 years on board, she knew the rhythm of the ship like her own pulse. This knock didn't fit. When she opened the hatch, 2 Marines stood stone-faced. No greetings, no explanation. Just a clipped, "Commander, you're to come with us." She followed, silent but alert. Down passageways she had walked 1,000 times, now filled with sudden glances away. Conversations halted mid-sentence, eyes glued to maintenance panels as she passed. No one said it aloud, but Maggie knew. Something had shifted, and not in her favor. They led her through the lower decks, past compartments she'd helped overhaul, past sailors she'd trained, mentored, and led through everything from navigation drills to near collisions. Now, they avoided her gaze like she was contagious, or already forgotten. When they reached the captain's quarters, the Marine on the right opened the door without knocking. Another break from protocol. Inside sat Captain Raymond Barnes, a man she'd flown alongside during a crisis in the Philippine Sea. He didn't rise, didn't meet her eyes. But 2 civilians did, dark suits, flat eyes, buzz cuts too precise to be anything but intelligence. "Commander Dawson, effective immediately, you are relieved of all duties aboard the Liberty," Captain Barnes said. His voice was as rigid as the crease in his uniform. Maggie blinked. "Sir, may I ask on what grounds?" "That information is classified," one of the civilians replied, sliding a manila folder across the desk. "These are your transfer orders. Your personal effects have been packed." She didn't reach for the folder. "My department, my team, re-signed," said the second civilian, voice colder than steel. She turned to Barnes. "Sir, after everything, 4 years, don't I deserve an explanation?" "You deserve nothing," the civilian snapped before Barnes could speak. Maggie froze, not in shock, in control. She'd been through war zones quieter than this room. "I see," she said quietly. "Then I'll follow my orders, Captain." Barnes' lips twitched, something between regret and restraint, but he said nothing. 2 Marines reappeared at the door, again not restraining her, just flanking her, escorting her like she was a diplomat or a ghost. They moved briskly. The walk back to her quarters was longer, heavier. People she knew by name, some who'd toasted her last birthday, found their shoes deeply interesting. Only Petty Officer Green, her youngest technician, looked her way. His eyes were red-rimmed. He pressed a hand against the glass of the sonar control room, but before she could return the gesture, someone pulled him out of view. Her quarters were no longer hers. The room had been stripped bare. Her medals, photographs, flight manuals, and dog-eared books packed neatly into a single duffel bag sitting atop her bunk. Her uniforms hung limp and empty, the kind of stillness that only comes when a life is erased quietly. She finally opened the folder. 1 sheet of paper, 1 sentence. "You are to report for further transfer at Naval Station Pearl Harbor. Transport arranged, no date, no role, no rationale." But there was more. Captain Barnes met her again at the lower deck, something no one expected. He handed her an envelope. "Open this when you're 10 miles out," he said quietly, not meeting her eyes. "Not before." Maggie hesitated. "Captain." "Good luck, Commander," was all he said, and then stepped back. No fanfare, no handshake, no salute, just the creak of metal stairs and the sound of waves licking the hull. They lowered her into a small motor launch, a boat more suited to coastal runs than open ocean transfers. A young sailor passed her the duffel, mumbled something about water and rations on board, and cast off. She sat at the stern watching the Liberty disappear into the haze. No one waved. No horns. No acknowledgement that she had ever stood watch on that flight deck, written battle protocols, or led acoustic defense strategies that once saved the ship from a silent threat none of them ever even saw. The envelope burned in her pocket. At 11 miles out, she opened it with fingers that didn't shake. Inside was a single line, handwritten in pencil, 15 degrees 24 N, since 60 degree 12 W, 1600 hours, coordinates, a time, and no signature. Maggie stared out at the endless ocean. She checked the onboard GPS, confirmed her position, estimated her course. At cruising speed, she could be there in 30 minutes. But why? Why the secrecy? Why the shunning? Had she broken protocol unknowingly? Was this about the anomaly 3 months ago? The signal deep beneath the Marianas that she was told to ignore? The one her sonar algorithm had flagged, that didn't match any known vessel or natural source. Was that it? The silence of the waves offered no answer. By 3:50 p.m., she was at the coordinates. Nothing. Then the water began to churn. Not from wind, not from tide, from below. Within moments, the surface bulged, then broke. A massive, black form emerged silently from the deep, sleek, monolithic, no hull number, no flag, no sound except the cascading seawater rolling off its smooth exterior. Then the hatch opened, and a man stepped out, salt and pepper hair, lean posture, captain's bars, but no insignia. He raised binoculars, found her, then waved her forward. Maggie Dawson, now alone, no rank, no orders, adjusted course and powered toward a submarine that didn't exist in any naval registry. Whatever this was, it wasn't exile. It was an invitation, and the mission had only just begun. The coordinates led Commander Margaret Dawson deeper into the Pacific's vastness. No islands, no ships, no signs of life. Just her in a motor launch, bobbing like a cork in open water, with salt spray stinging her face and the sun leaning hard from above. She'd made it to the spot by 12:45. The note said 1600 hours, 3 hours and change to sit, to wonder. The envelope hadn't mentioned a name, not even a ship, only the numbers. Ficken 24 north, 16312 west. Her GPS confirmed the location. She cut the engine. The ocean around her stretched out smooth as glass, broken only by the occasional gull and the steady hiss of waves licking the side of her craft. She tried the radio. USS Liberty, this is Commander Dawson. Do you copy? Nothing. Just static. Either they weren't listening, or they weren't allowed to answer. She used the time to ration water, adjust the makeshift sunshade she'd rigged, and keep her eyes scanning the horizon through a pair of field binoculars. But there was nothing. No land, no boats, no planes overhead, just water and waiting. Time dragged in that peculiar way only the ocean can summon, where 5 minutes feels like 50, and thoughts get louder than the wind. What if it was a mistake? What if she'd been discarded, thrown away after years of service, and the envelope had only been meant to occupy her while decisions were made elsewhere? But at 1600 hours exactly, her watch beeped, and the ocean changed. It was subtle at first, a shift in the water's rhythm, then a pulse like a second heartbeat beneath the surface. 200 yards off her bow, the waves began to bubble. A dome formed. Not a wave, not a whale, something rising. And then she saw it. At first, just a dark shape under the surface, then steel, then the unmistakable line of a hull, smooth, black, and far too wide to be standard Navy. The submarine broke the surface without a sound. No fanfare, no engine roar. It simply arrived. The vessel was unlike anything she'd ever seen. Nearly twice the size of a Virginia, class fast, attack submarine, but leaner. Like it had been designed not just to survive underwater, but to vanish into it. Its surface shimmered with a dark matte finish, absorbing sunlight instead of reflecting it. No hull number, no flag, and no question. This was not in the Navy's registry. A hatch cracked open. Steam hissed quietly from the seal. A figure emerged from the conning tower, tall, shoulders squared, dark hair silvered at the temples, a uniform without any name tag or insignia, but unmistakably worn with authority. He raised binoculars, found her, then waved. Maggie stared. Then instinct kicked in. She restarted the small motor and throttled toward the vessel cautiously, maintaining bearing and distance, just like she'd been taught in submarine interface drills. Though none of those had prepared her for this. As she neared, the man called out, "Commander Dawson." His voice carried clear and firm across the open water. "Yes, sir. I'm Captain Nathan Harland. Welcome to the USS Phantom." She blinked. That name didn't register. It shouldn't exist. "Phantom," she repeated. Harland offered a faint smile. "That's the point." Two crewmen in dark Navy overalls, no names, no ranks, stepped onto the deck, ropes in hand. They tossed lines to her and secured the launch, then offered hands to help her aboard. Maggie hesitated just 1 second, then climbed. The deck felt solid, real, cold to the touch beneath her boots. "Your duffel will be brought aboard," one crewman said. The hatch remained open. Captain Harlan motioned toward it. "We should head inside, Commander. Time is not on our side." She gave one last glance at the endless blue horizon, then descended into a vessel that didn't officially exist, commanded by a man with no listed rank, for a purpose no one had told her. The hatch closed behind them with a hydraulic sigh. Inside, the submarine was strange. The corridor was slightly wider than standard Navy design. Lighting was low, indirect, with none of the usual buzzing fluorescence. The air smelled faintly metallic, but also new, like tech that hadn't aged yet. Everything about the vessel said classified. She passed systems she didn't recognize, displays running silent diagnostics in symbols and waveform patterns unfamiliar to her, and equipment far beyond anything she'd seen aboard the Liberty or even in advanced training programs. Captain Harland kept his pace brisk, speaking only once. "You're not here by accident, Commander. Everything that's happened to you over the past 72 hours was planned. So I'm not being disciplined." He glanced at her. "You're being recruited." They turned a corner and entered a control room, unlike any CC she'd known. It was wider, cooler. Screens curved around the perimeter in fluid arcs. Stations weren't arranged by tradition, but by function. Operators worked in eerie silence, focused, precise. She didn't recognize most of the faces, but one froze her in place. Maggie. A woman rose from a workstation. Lieutenant Erica Shaw, her old roommate from Annapolis, the one who had left the service after giving birth last year. But Erica was here, in uniform, wearing a version of navy blues stripped of all the expected. "You left for maternity leave," Maggie whispered. Erica offered a grin. "So did half the crew. Except we didn't leave. We changed uniforms." Before Maggie could respond, Harlan spoke again. "You're here because 3 months ago, your sonar algorithm picked up something it shouldn't have, something our enemies didn't want us to find." He walked to a nearby console and activated a display. A waveform flickered into view, a familiar one. Maggie's breath caught. "The anomaly. You flagged this?" Harlan continued. "And you were told to dismiss it. But you were right. And we need you now? What is this place?" she asked. "A submarine," he said simply. "Designed to find what was never meant to be found." She turned slowly, letting it all sink in. The ship, the crew, the silence of it all. The Phantom wasn't just a vessel. It was a line in the water drawn in stealth and steel. And she had just crossed it. Commander Margaret Dawson sat alone in the dimly lit acoustic analysis bay of the USS Phantom, her fingers gently tracing the edge of a console that shouldn't exist. Everything about this vessel whispered secrecy, not in the obvious way, like padlocks or guards, but in the way the walls absorbed sound, in the way no names were spoken too loudly, and in how everyone on board seemed to have come from nowhere. The room was state of the art, beyond anything Maggie had seen in her nearly 2 decades in the Navy. Sonar systems that could read a shrimp's heartbeat, processor stacks that made supercomputers look slow, and acoustic mapping interfaces so intuitive they felt like an extension of her own thoughts. But it wasn't the tech that struck her most. It was the silence. Not just quiet, controlled silence. The kind that only comes when people know their words matter more than they can say out loud. The door behind her opened, still settling in. Maggie turned. Lieutenant Erica Shaw stepped inside, her smile wary but genuine. She held 2 mugs of coffee, black, strong, and mercifully hot. "You still take it without cream?" Erica asked. "Always," Maggie replied, accepting the cup. Some things never change. Erica had been her roommate during Annapolis. Brilliant, focused, and the only one in their class who could beat Maggie in sonar interpretation drills. She'd left active duty a year ago, supposedly for maternity leave. Now here she was. No record, no explanation. Just another ghost on board a vessel full of them. "So you disappeared too," Maggie said. Erica nodded. "1 minute I was reviewing mid-band intercepts in Guam. The next, I got called into a special debrief. 2 hours later, I was on a transport to a location that technically isn't on any map. And they just pulled you out." "Yep. My CO thinks I transferred to a DARPA research role. My family gets the occasional safe and sound email, but even those are filtered. Out there I don't exist." Maggie sipped her coffee, feeling the warmth fight back against the deep chill of the ocean, and the deeper chill of what they were doing. "Is that what this ship is? A collection of people who vanished?" Erica didn't answer right away. She simply gestured toward a small wall, mounted display in the corridor outside. The screen cycled through personnel status. No names, just titles. XO, tactical, acoustics, nav, command. Each dot was green, active, waiting. The Phantom isn't part of the Navy, Erica said finally. Not in the traditional sense. We answer directly to the National Security Council. There's no chain of command like you remember. There's only the mission. And what exactly is the mission? Erica gave her a long look. To listen, to track, to understand what's moving out there, before anyone else even knows it exists. That's a tall order for a ghost ship. That's the point. They walked slowly down the passageway. Around them, the Phantom thrummed with barely perceptible motion, a whisper against the deep. The bulkheads were insulated with layered composite material Maggie had only seen referenced in black, budget white papers. The crew moved efficiently, but without the constant barks and radio calls of a normal sub. No shouting, no alarms, just precision. They passed a crew lounge, dimly lit, no decorations. A young officer sat alone with a notepad, sketching what looked like acoustic waveforms by hand. Across from him, a sailor was reading a dog-eared book on Cold War sonar warfare. These weren't standard Navy kids. These were experts. Outliers. Recruits not because of who they knew, but what they could do. Everyone here has a reason they're here, Erica explained. Some built systems no one else understood. Some heard something once and never forgot it. Some cracked codes. Some, like you, spotted a signal that wasn't supposed to be there. And instead of promotion, Maggie said, we disappear. No, Erica said softly. Instead of politics, we get purpose. That hit Maggie harder than she expected, because back on the Liberty, purpose had slowly been buried under meetings, protocol reviews, and endless power struggles between ranks. But here, below the surface, there was no room for career maneuvering, only the work. They reached the operations center, dark panels glowing with layers of sonar data. Captain Harland stood at the central console, studying a series of synchronized acoustic traces on a rolling display. Commander Dawson, he said without turning, walk with me. She followed him into the adjoining briefing room, where a long holographic table displayed a rotating 3D model of the Pacific. Red threads cut across sensitive undersea cable routes. Overlaying them were faint green blips, ghost signals too faint to be classified, except someone here had done exactly that. We're monitoring 12 separate drones, Harlan said, all unmanned, all deep and all moving in calculated patterns. We believe they're being deployed by a research vessel operating in international waters, but equipped far beyond civilian spec. Chinese origin, Maggie asked. Most likely, he replied. But proving it without starting a diplomatic wildfire is the tricky part. She nodded. This wasn't just surveillance. It was a chess match played underwater, with each side pretending they didn't see the other's pieces moving. So what's the next step? She asked. Harlan looked up, eyes serious. We'll find the pattern, we document. We prepare for the moment command gives us permission to intercept. And until then, we'll listen, he said. And we trust each other. Because no one else knows what we're doing here. No one's coming to help. And no one's going to pin a medal on your chest when this is over. Maggie stared at the map for a long moment. It was a battlefield with no borders, no headlines. Just noise, signals, and silence. I didn't come here for medals, she said quietly. I came here to matter. Harlan smiled just a little. Then you're in the right place, Commander. And with that, the lights dimmed. The ocean grew darker. But for the crew of the USS Phantom, the war had already begun, and no one above the waves even knew it. The days aboard the USS Phantom blurred into a rhythm of quiet precision. There were no reveille bugles, no loudspeakers, and no saluting, only the subtle pulse of systems online and a crew that moved like they'd been born for the deep. Commander Margaret Dawson had begun to adapt to the silence, not just around her, but within her. The Phantom wasn't just a warship. It was a listening device with a pulse and purpose. Every hour, she tuned and refined her acoustic detection algorithms at the workstation that now felt as familiar as her bunk once had on the Liberty. But on the 10th day beneath the surface, Captain Harland called an all-hands briefing in the command center. The screen at the front of the room displayed a dark, grid-like map of the Pacific, overlaid with paths, arcs, and green nodes that drifted like patient predators. When everyone had assembled, Harlan began. "We're initiating Phase 1 of the Phantom Directive." He turned to Maggie. "Commander Dawson, as of 0200 hours this morning, your updated algorithm detected 4 new contacts operating below 5,000 feet in a staggered grid formation near the Guam relay zone. What do we know?" Maggie stepped forward, voice steady despite the eyes on her. "These contacts are not marine life. They're too consistent. They're not standard sonar reflections, either. They're low-energy acoustic shadows moving in controlled intervals. Based on the pattern, they're communicating. Quietly. Which means coordination. Which means purpose." She nodded toward the map. "We're looking at unmanned underwater vehicles. Not one. A fleet." Harlan didn't react visibly. He never did. "And based on the frequency of sightings, we believe they're deploying from a mothership," added Lieutenant Erica Shaw, tapping a sequence that overlaid a faint red line onto the projection. "A Chinese oceanographic vessel operating just outside the 12-mile limit. Disguised but watching us. Their purpose?" someone asked. Erica replied without hesitation. "They're not studying fish. They're scanning our infrastructure, undersea cables, defense lines, listening arrays. Strategic soft spots." Harlan stepped back in front of the display. The room was still. "Our mission, as you've all been briefed, is threefold." He raised a finger. "1, we observe and record. Track every signal, every movement. These drones aren't just tools. They leave fingerprints, acoustic, digital, and behavioral. A second finger. 2, we gather evidence. Enough to inform National Command and build an undeniable case of covered operations against U.S. military assets. Then the third. 3, if authorized, we intercept and retrieve a drone unit for analysis." Maggie folded her arms. "And if they detect us before we complete Phase 3, Harlan met her gaze squarely. "Then we abort. Our presence must remain invisible. The Phantom does not exist, not to them, not even to our own fleet." It was clear this was not a confrontation. This was a shadow operation, built on silence, accuracy, and timing. Over the next several days, the Phantom crept through the depths on silent running. Engine noise was minimized to a low hum. Internal communications were restricted to coded hand signals and soft-spoken confirmations. Maggie and Lieutenant Rivera worked side by side in the sonar bay, parsing the contact data frame by frame. Eventually, they isolated a promising candidate, a drone that had strayed slightly from its grid, likely performing a relay check, or possibly in the process of repositioning. It was the moment they'd been preparing for. "This one's operating independently," Rivera noted. "It's slower, maybe a weaker signal, easier to isolate without triggering a cascade response." Harlan approved the intercept. "We go to quiet depth. Approach under full acoustic masking. We have one shot." The capture mechanism, concealed beneath the hull, was deployed. It was a marvel of engineering, a multi-armed harness designed to cradle and suppress the drone without damaging its internal systems. As the Phantom closed in, Maggie tracked the target's heartbeat, a subtle, rhythmic pulse across the underwater acoustic spectrum. Not just presence, but intent. 10 meters, she whispered, eyes locked on the waveform. 5, 3, a sharp ping. Deploy. The arms engaged. A split second passed. "Target secure," Rivera said, almost in disbelief. The room breathed again. The drone was brought aboard under tight protocols, sealed in a radiation-shielded containment unit. All signals were jammed. No alerts would be sent. No pings would reach home. Maggie stood beside the recovery team in the lab, staring through the clear panel at what looked like a piece of modern sculpture, sleek, matte black metal, no moving parts, about 12 feet long, tapered like a blade. No manufacturer's mark, no serial number. It didn't hum, it didn't blink, but it felt aware. Dr. Elena Weiss, a DARPA physicist brought in for technical verification, studied its surface with a mixture of wonder and alarm. This thing isn't just advanced. It's a decade beyond anything we've seen. It uses magnetohydrodynamic propulsion, no moving parts, virtually silent. And this, she gestured to a narrow dorsal ridge, could be a passive sensor array. Could also be an active communication spine. We'll need time. Maggie stepped closer. "Then let's give you time. I'll help log the acoustic patterns. I've already tagged its movement style. I want to see if that same signature shows up in other contacts. You're building a fingerprint database? Weiss asked. That's the goal. Maggie nodded. If we can ID each drone individually, we'll know how many they've deployed, where they've been, and where they're heading next. Harland entered the lab with a nod of approval. Evidence is now secured, he said. Forward a preliminary report to National Command. Redacted appropriately. They'll want verification before authorizing next steps. And if they don't believe us, someone asked. They will, Harland replied. Because this drone isn't theory, it's here, and it's not built for research. Later that evening, Maggie found herself alone in the observation alcove near the crew mess, her coffee cooling beside her. The ocean beyond the viewport was still, but she knew better now. Out there, machines prowled silently through the deep, watching, mapping, waiting, and thanks to the Phantom, they weren't alone anymore. The first step had been taken. Now came the real work. Commander Margaret Dawson had spent the better part of her career interpreting the language of the deep. Echoes, pings, pressure shifts. These weren't just noise to her. They were conversation. And now, sitting at the acoustic console aboard the USS Phantom, she was hearing something she never expected. The drones were talking. Not in English. Not in Morse. But in faint, structured acoustic pulses, spaced just far enough apart to suggest timing, rhythm, and intent. It wasn't random oceanic noise or sonar scatter. It was language. There, she pointed one evening, leaning closer to the spectral readout. See that pulse train? It's not sonar feedback, it's structured, repeating every 14.2 seconds. Lieutenant Rivera, seated beside her, adjusted the filter gain and nodded slowly. It's like a handshake protocol. Low frequency, hard to detect, but it's definitely a form of ping and response. Maggie's stomach tightened. They're coordinating. And that changes everything, Captain Harland said as he stepped into the lab behind them. His voice was low, but the weight in it filled the room. These aren't just rogue underwater probes. They're part of a network. Over the next 2 days, the team confirmed it. The drones were forming a net, a pattern of wide, staggered formations that perfectly aligned with known undersea cable routes. They weren't just mapping anymore. They were placing things. Through high-resolution acoustic imaging, the Phantom's advanced sonar picked up tiny anomalies along the ocean floor. Cylindrical objects fixed to communication cables that stretched for thousands of miles between Guam, Hawaii, and the U.S. mainland. They're planting devices, said Dr. Alina Weiss, examining the data, spaced precisely 1.6 miles apart, same size, same placement technique. These aren't for mapping. They're for monitoring, or worse. If they're passive, Maggie reasoned, they could be listening, pulling terabytes of data traffic straight from our strategic lines. But if they're active, then in a crisis, Harland finished grimly, they could cut us off from half our naval command structure in the Pacific. That possibility chilled the room. Every major U.S. military base in the Indo-Pacific depended on undersea cable traffic for real-time communication. Satellite links were fast, but vulnerable. Cables were supposed to be secure, untouchable. Until now, we need confirmation, hard evidence. And we've got one chance to get it. That chance came 48 hours later. The Phantom had been silently tailing one of the more isolated drones, one they'd tagged as Unit 27. Based on the unique acoustic fingerprint Maggie had recorded, it moved slightly differently than the others, slower, possibly older, maybe even malfunctioning, or maybe it was bait. This one's not staying in formation, Maggie said as she studied the pattern on her monitor. It's drifting out. Either they're repositioning or it's a test. Either way, it's the one we want. Captain Harland nodded. Prepare for silent approach. Deploy the capture harness on my mark. The maneuver took hours, no lights. No active propulsion, just ballast shifts and control surfaces gliding the Phantom into position. Less like a warship, more like a shadow falling across the sea floor. When the drone finally passed within range, Rivera gave the signal. Target in envelope. Deploying capture system now. The arms unfolded with the precision of a surgeon, no sound, no vibration. They closed around the drone like a shell. Contact made, no alarms triggered. Unit secure. They'd done it again. Once aboard, the drone was placed in a double-sealed isolation chamber. The room buzzed with quiet urgency as the team disassembled the outer housing under Dr. Wace's supervision. Every bolt, every fiber was scanned, logged, and tagged. Maggie watched as the final panel was removed, revealing a honeycomb of internal systems. Coils, microcontrollers, memory arrays. But at the core sat something none of them had expected, a capsule. Silver, no wires, and a blinking light. "That's not a battery," Wace said. "That's a beacon. But it's not broadcasting, not yet." Maggie leaned in. "So it can go dark until it needs to activate." "Then what?" "Relay data. Trigger self-destruct." No one answered. They extracted the capsule with extreme caution and fed it through the containment scanner. The results came back in less than 10 minutes. And they hit like a torpedo. The capsule contained a combination of storage and transmission hardware, designed to piggyback off the electromagnetic field generated by data cables. It didn't need to breach the cable's insulation. It simply had to sit close and listen. "This is beyond espionage," Wace said. "It's infrastructure sabotage. If we found one, there are more. And if they're active," Harland added, "we may already be compromised." The report was assembled within 6 hours, complete with imaging, decoded communication pulses, acoustic profiles, and unit schematics. It was uploaded via encrypted burst transmission to the National Security Council. Then came the reply, a single line. "Phase 3 confirmed. Continue intercept operations." For the crew of the Phantom, the message was both validation and warning. Washington now believed them. But it also meant the game had changed. "We're no longer just observers," Harlan told the team in their next briefing. "We're now defenders. Quiet ones. Forgotten ones. But defenders nonetheless." That night, Maggie found herself in the mess with Erica, both of them sipping coffee that had long since gone cold. "How do you go back after this?" Maggie asked. "To a life where people still believe the biggest threats come from above, not below." Erica didn't answer at first. "Then, maybe you don't go back. Maybe this becomes the only place that makes sense." Maggie didn't reply. She didn't need to. Because out there, beneath thousands of feet of seawater, something had been hiding, and they had found it. The silence had spoken, and they had listened. The Phantom didn't celebrate victories. There were no bells rung, no commendations read over the intercom, no clapping in the mess, only silence, and a sharper sense of readiness. After the capture of the drone, after the proof had been transmitted in full, something shifted aboard the submarine. Not in routine, but in posture. The crew moved with a gravity that hadn't been there before. Because now the higher-ups believed them. 2 days after the transmission, Captain Nathan Harlan summoned Commander Margaret Dawson to the briefing room. It was empty, save for a steaming cup of coffee already poured at her usual seat. He stood near the observation screen, hands clasped behind his back, eyes fixed on the bathymetric overlay of the Pacific Basin. "Take a seat, Commander." Maggie did. The quiet tension in the room felt heavier than the pressure outside the hull. Harlan turned slowly and got straight to it. "Command has reviewed the data. The capsule, the placement arrays, the coordinated pulses, all of it. And it's enough?" Maggie nodded. "Policy change. Already in motion. Communications Command has issued a silent protocol shift for cable traffic, more encryption layers, rerouting secondary nodes. The Department of Defense has confirmed. This is no longer an isolated concern. It's now on the radar." Quietly. There was a pause. A long one. "They won't say our name," Harland added. "And they won't mention this vessel." "Of course not," Maggie said. He gave a faint, approving smile. "But your report, your signal tracking, your fingerprint database, it was pivotal. Without your early algorithm detection, we would have been blind." "That's what I was trained to do," she replied, though a flicker of something human and unguarded, passed across her face. Because she had never really heard that said out loud. Not on the Liberty, not in briefings, not on performance reviews. But now, in this hidden corner of the world, it was acknowledged. Harlan stepped closer and pulled a small box from his uniform pocket. He opened it. Inside sat a single silver pin. It was the submarine dolphins, traditionally awarded to fully qualified submariners, but the design was altered. Subtle differences, the trident motif flared longer. The eyes of the dolphins were darkened with obsidian inlay. The mark of the phantom. You've earned this, he said, placing the box on the table. And something else. He reached for a sealed folder and slid it across to her. Commander Park will be rotating off in 5 weeks. He's been selected to command the next vessel in the Phantom class line. USS Revenant. Maggie glanced up sharply. You're offering me the XO slot. I'm not offering, Harlan replied. I'm informing you that you've been selected. The room was silent. Not because of shock, but because Maggie Dawson understood the weight of that role. The Phantom wasn't a normal submarine, and being its executive officer meant walking even deeper into the shadows. What about my record? My career back topside? Maintained, Harlan said. If you accept the position, a carefully crafted narrative will be prepared. You'll be listed as assigned to a classified interagency task force, with contributions logged under umbrella clearance. And if I say no, you'll return to the surface with a commendation, classified but noted. Your service record will be enhanced. You'll get promoted, assigned to whatever role you choose. But this part of your career will never be spoken of again. She opened the folder. Inside was the formal offer, typed in plain navy font. No embellishments, no flourish, just a statement of trust. May I take time to consider? She asked. Of course, Harlan said. Take the week. But if I know you, and I think I do, you've already made up your mind. Later that evening, Maggie found herself back in the acoustic lab. She ran a diagnostic sweep, not because it was needed, but because the act calmed her. The patterns, the pulses, the ocean's language, they all made more sense than the politics she'd left behind. Erica Shaw stepped in, leaned against the bulkhead, arms folded. I heard, she said with a smile. Maggie didn't respond right away. Do you miss the surface? She finally asked. Sometimes, Erica said. My folks think I'm still in tech command. My sister keeps asking when I'll visit. But, she looked around the lab. I've never been more clear about what I'm doing, or why I'm doing it. Maggie nodded slowly. It's not the medals. It's the mission, exactly. They sat in silence, listening to the faint hum of the Phantom. Somewhere outside the hull, the ocean whispered its secrets, but for once, they were ahead of the curve. You'll make a hell of an XO, Erica said finally. We'll see. Later that night, as the lights dimmed to low visibility mode, Maggie walked the passageways alone. She passed sailors at quiet workstations, engineers asleep in hammocks tied tight against the steel, and intelligence officers murmuring across encrypted screens. Not one of them would be on the evening news. Not one would get a headline. But every single one had changed the course of global policy, without ever leaving the shadows. She returned to her quarters, opened the box with the modified dolphins, and pinned them to her collar. Then she picked up the folder, signed her name, and slid it under her door to be collected in the morning. No applause, no ceremony, just a single decision, and the quiet certainty that she'd chosen the path where she could make the most difference, beneath the waves, where no one would know her name, and that was just fine with her. The paper sat on the desk unsigned. Commander Margaret Dawson stared at it in silence. The offer was clear. The terms had been explained. Nothing hidden, nothing sugar-coated. If she signed, she would become the executive officer of the USS Phantom, a vessel that didn't officially exist, executing missions that would never be acknowledged, in a war most people never knew had begun. If she declined, she'd be sent back to the surface. Her record would reflect a successful 6-month assignment with a classified project in Hawaii, a few commendations, a new posting, maybe a promotion within a year. Clean, respectable, forgettable. She rose from the desk and walked slowly through the dim corridors of the sub. It was quiet as always, but not dead. The hum of the Phantom was constant, low, steady, like a heartbeat, the kind of sound that reminded her the ocean was alive and watching. In the wardroom, Lieutenant Rivera was playing chess with a petty officer. No words exchanged, just quiet strategy and the occasional tap of a knight moving across metal. Down the hall, Chief Matson was repairing a sensor array by hand, humming a hymn Maggie hadn't heard in years. Something soft and southern. Something her mother might have sung while folding laundry. These weren't just ghost sailors. They were believers. in the mission, in the work. In each other, she turned into the small viewing alcove. From here, you could see the deep, pitch black, interrupted only by the soft blue glow of the sonar readouts reflecting off the reinforced glass. This is where she found Captain Harland. He didn't speak at first, just stood there, arms folded, eyes on the void outside. "I figured I'd find you here," Maggie said softly. "It's where I go when I need to remember why we do this," he replied. She stepped up beside him. "Do you ever regret choosing this life?" Harlan didn't answer right away. "Sometimes," he admitted. "I miss my kids' birthdays. I miss warm sunlight. I miss hearing my name called out loud. But no, I don't regret it. Because it matters," she said. He nodded. "Because it matters. And because I know there are people above who can sleep at night, because we're down here in the dark." Silence stretched between them. "If I go back," she said, "I'll have a normal path. Clear, predictable. I'll make rank, maybe even get a command of my own one day. But it'll be paperwork, war games, promotion boards, safe," Harland added. "Yes, but I'll always wonder if I walked away from where I was most needed." Harlan turned to face her. For once, there was no edge to his voice, just respect. "Maggie, this isn't about choosing between right and wrong. It's about choosing who you are. Some people were meant to lead where others can see them. Others were meant to serve where no one ever will. You think I belong here. I think you already are here." She smiled faintly. "I haven't signed the paper yet." "Then what are you waiting for?" Maggie didn't answer. She just stared back out into the darkness. Out there somewhere, more drones were listening, learning, waiting. And if someone wasn't here to stop them, she returned to her quarters. The pin Harland had given her, modified dolphins, the silent symbol of the Phantom, still sat in its small velvet box. She picked it up, turning it slowly in her fingers. Not a medal, not even an official qualification, but somehow the most honest recognition she'd ever received. She laid it gently on her desk, then picked up the folder. Pen in hand, she signed. There were no trumpets, no applause, no taps played softly in the background, just a name. On a page the next morning, she passed Harlan the folder without a word. He didn't open it, he just nodded. "Welcome home, Executive Officer Dawson." She returned to the acoustic lab and began calibrating the long-range hydrophone array. There was already another signal pinging faintly in the distance. Something new. Possibly another drone. Possibly something worse. The sea doesn't sleep, and neither would she. In that moment, surrounded by steel and silence, Maggie knew this wasn't exile. This wasn't punishment. It was purpose. And she had chosen it freely. From the outside world, she would disappear. Her parents in Michigan would get quarterly check-ins. Her colleagues would assume she had been reassigned to intelligence coordination in a classified region. Her name would fade from the Navy grapevine. But down here, in the deep, she would be one of the few keeping the line from breaking. One of the last to know what the real war looked like before it even began. And one of the even fewer willing to stay, with no promise of recognition. Just the hope that one day, someone up there would never have to know why they were safe, because someone like her had stood in the shadows and never stepped back. Not every hero stands in the spotlight. Some choose the shadows, voluntarily, not because they're afraid, not because they've been forgotten, but because they know that real impact often happens where no one is looking. Commander Margaret Dawson could have walked away. She had every reason to return to a safer path, with recognition, medals, and a steady career. But instead, she chose something most people never would, to serve in silence. To protect others without ever hearing a thank you. To matter even if no one ever knows how. And that is one of the deepest truths about life sometimes. The most meaningful things we do won't be acknowledged. Sometimes no one will see the battles we fight, or the people we save. But you will know. And that's enough. So whether you're a veteran, a caregiver, a teacher, or simply someone who's spent a lifetime doing the right thing even when it wasn't celebrated, this story is for you, because the world is held together not just by those on stage, but by those in the background, holding the line. Share it in the comments. You never know who your story might inspire. And if stories like this move you, Stories about quiet strength, silent service, and real courage. Please give this video a like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications. We tell the stories that deserve to be remembered, even if history never writes their names. Because some heroes never seek the spotlight, they become the light in the darkest places.